When I first read your work and read about the Flynn effect, over time I thought about this and I thought, is it really likely that IQ is going to increase exponentially by a standard deviation, 15 up to 15 IQ points every 20 to 25 years, which is a rough measurement of a generation? And I thought really statistically, it's more likely that things will regress towards a mean. And then recently I discovered the reverse Flynn effect.
That's right. Well, I wrote an article on that I hope you've read. It was published in Intelligence a few years back.
Yes.
And I say there's nothing about the Flynn effect that's written in the stars like the law of gravity. The reason the Flynn effect has occurred is that over the 20th century, most people have been exposed to more cognitively demanding environments. And if that is no longer true, they won't make gains. Not only won't they make IQ gains, which is trivial, they won't make gains in terms of developing critical intelligence. And, there's nothing written in the stars. I think there's every indication. Today, young people are having a much harder time finding intellectual challenge at universities.
I read a study which said that IQs peaked at around the late 1990s. It's been reported in 9 studies in 7 countries.
That's right, in Scandinavia among young adults. If you read my stuff, you'll see that in Holland, it looks like it's stalled, but without regressing. If you look at Germany, there's an amazing difference. They're gaining still in vocabulary, but losing in spatial visualization. If you look at America, they seem to be gaining a bit on all fronts. And you have to look at it by age group. Elderly people in practically every advanced society are making big IQ gains over their parents at an elderly age. They're being stimulated and exercising and better diets. So you have to look at by group. My feeling is that during the school years, we've reached a point where, for reasons we can't really manipulate, most young people, particularly males, are interacting less successfully with the school environment. So I would be very surprised to see data that shows IQ gains in that age group. I think we're still in a position where the world of work is making a few more cognitively demanding jobs than it used to. So we would see moderate gains there. And of course, in old age, we would see quite profound gains. So you have to ask not only what country you're dealing in, but what age group you're dealing with. They did a wonderful study of ravens, and they found that when they compared modern kids with kids in the 1930s, they didn't gain much at school because in Scotland at that time years of schooling were pretty universal. But what they did find was that later on, after their school years, they made profound gains on ravens.
I guess my point was that in this study, the 500,000 Danish men declining below pre-1991 levels. To me, it seems like IQ tests are no longer matching the environment for what selects out for what's important in terms of intelligent behaviour.
Yes, the intelligent thing is to read widely, think hard, argue with your opponents, and develop critical intelligence. That's always been the really important thing.
Well, could it change, though?
Yes, that can change, and I'm afraid it's not necessarily changing for the better. That is, I'm afraid, again, that young people are reading less. Apparently, all the studies of American schools, if you've looked at my book, show that even in terms of occupational skills, kids are losing critical intelligence, and they barely even read the course material any longer. I mean, there's a social trend. A majority of courses are now given in America by adjunct professors who can be fired at will and have terrible conditions. And they're desperately trying to publish despite being overloaded. And they make a hedonic pact with the students. They say to the students, we won't ask much of you as long as you give us good write-ups. And the students follow. There's a great correlation between how favorably they are and how easy a course is. And they have relapsed to where they're now reading probably no more than 5 or 8 hours a week as compared to 13 in the past. So they say to the lecturer, go ahead, give us a course book. Give us something that all we have to do is memorize a few chapters from and we can get an A. And we'll write you a good reference. And the beleaguered lecturer thinks, God, if I assign a demanding essay, think of all the marking I'll have to do. I'd better spend what little time I have on trying to publish in a professional journal. So you have a situation in which students and staff corrupt each other.
Yes, I've been in that situation. I suppose I meant that perhaps what is required from the environment for intelligent behaviour changes. So I'm thinking that as technology develops and people have access to information all the time. So if you think about, I administer as a provisional psychologist the WACE, and some of it, even the fluid abilities, I can see could be encapsulated if you just had practice in the right area, if that makes sense, like block design and pattern recognition.
You have to know something. Take advantage of the internet rather than be corrupted by it. If you just set sail on it, almost any screwball can influence you. How can you know why there was a terrible war in Nigeria if you don't know that a war even happened? You're never going to put into your Google what were the causes of the war in Nigeria. You're ignorant that the war ever took place.
I guess, I mean, you don't need to remember information anymore necessarily, like what's being tested in the waste, because you can just outsource that to technology.
Yes, well, many people seem to think that they are making use of the visual world if they merely garner a lot of helter-skelter information on what immediately interests them. That's not the way to proceed. But the main theme, I try and show how academics in some ways are their own worst enemies. They too can be dogmatic and persecute academics who have a minority view. And I also try to point out that people who train teachers are not innocent of the fact that the students these teachers teach come to university without the equipment to do well. So it's not all a matter of academics being beaten up by other people. They beat up on themselves. And sometimes the students they turn out send them a clientele that's not promising.